Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. All of you are so welcome. I've got so many new subscribers and I welcome all of you, and I just thank you so much for tuning in. And I'm so delighted that I have such amazing subscribers. You guys all rock, you really, really do. And I'm very, very fortunate and privileged to have such amazing subscribers on my team. And before we get started, I've got an amazing story for you tonight that you're really going to love. But don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, my name is Beryl and I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. And my Bigfoot encounter happened in 1992 when I was 15 years old. Long before I was ever born, when my father was 28 at the time, he became immersed in a game of poker at a casino in Vegas on a random, somewhat spur-of-the-moment trip to celebrate one of his friends' bachelor parties. As is commonly the case when you're in Vegas, they all attempted to play a game of poker. My father ended up playing throughout the entire evening, long after all his friends had left the casino, all drained of money and hope of making it big or cracking the jackpot. It would seem that my dad was on a winning streak, and he got himself caught up in the euphoria and excitement of the moment, and had made a lot of money. He boldly tried to challenge some highly esteemed players who were revered by the casino as some of the big guns, so to speak. My father said he ended up on a table with resolute, sombre players that were quite literally sweating on the brow and champing at the bit as they studied their cards with contemplative, po-faced anticipation. He knew he was out of his depth, playing with such introspective, professional, affluent players. He did not care, as he had drunk away too much, and was not taking the game as pensively or as seriously as the professionals clearly were. One of the slightly drunk players became somewhat cocky and supercilious, and said to my father that he would give 4 acres of his pristine hunting land to him if he could beat him. It was an impulsive off-the-cuff dare that he would later regret. The man who challenged my dad was wearing a dashing cowboy hat, a dazzling cowboy belt with a smart gold emblem of an eagle on it, and a pair of Levi jeans, with a rather dashing pair of tan crocodile skin boots. He was smoking a very thick cigar, and was swaggering excitedly because he had an excellent hand, and he was almost certain he could not be beaten, and boldly placed his winning hand on the table, looking up at my father with a jubilant, smug look, expecting to see a defeated look develop on my father's face. He was to be disappointed, although initially my father did tease him mercilessly, a little bit like dangling a sausage in front of a dog. My father looked very sombre and downcast for a second or so, and then gradually he placed a royal flush on the table, dragging it out by putting one card down on the table at a time, and seemingly prolonging the agony for a very long moment. Once he had laid out his hand on the table for all to see, there was a huge, shocked silence, and no one said a word. Then the man with the cigar stamped it out, and looked at my father with an aghast expression on his face. "I didn't see that coming, son. Not bad for a first-timer," he said. "I'm not easily beaten, but you're a deserving winner. Well done. You've got yourself 4 acres of my prime hunting land in the Pacific Northwest, on my hunting estate." My father even said the drinks hostess at the time nudged him tightly and said, "Well done. You beat one of the best casino players tonight, and you must celebrate, because I've never seen him lose to a first-timer before." To be fair to the gentleman in the cowboy hat, he did indeed honour his promise and give my father the 4 acres of land on his very prestigious hunting estate, although he did offer to buy the land back from my father on numerous occasions, but my father refused to sell the land back to him. When my father married my mother 2 years later, they were able to build their own dream home on a huge hunting estate. We are so privileged to live in such an idyllic part of the world, which would never have been possible if my father had not won this wager. So sometimes the strangest things happen in life that may have been divinely orchestrated. Who knows? The gargantuan hunting estate was situated on the edge of a very large white gravel road, and because our small-time property was built on this colossal hunting estate and was never fenced off, we were quite literally living on a property flanked by vast areas of natural forest consisting of Douglas firs, white oaks, crab apples, red alders that literally went back for miles, along with green undulating valleys, fields of wild flowers, and exquisitely beautiful ponds as well as silvery lakes, not to mention the indigenous wild species of whitetail and mule deer that are hunted on the property, especially during hunting season by professional hunters from all over the world. When my father started bulldozing the land to prepare the area for building our brand new dream home that my mother had designed herself with the help of a local architect, it would seem that as soon as the building progressed, it was halted and temporarily suspended and stalled when the building team stumbled across several human remains rolled up in a carpet, as well as a woman's handbag and some very old weathered clothes that were uncovered in a very shallow grave where we were building the foundations to our home. As you can imagine, it was a horrifying setback to discover these mysterious remains, and it appeared that the corpse of the woman was less than 6 months old, which was even more horrifying because it meant that her body had only recently been buried. The body was of a very young 23-year-old Swedish au pair who had gone missing 6 months prior from her au pair job in the Pacific Northwest. It appeared that she had been shot at point-blank range with a deadly weapon that would have killed her almost immediately. The medical examiner found a human fetus in the woman's womb of an unborn baby, and the police at the time believed that the fetus was somehow the cause of the woman's untimely demise. They were proven correct, of course, at a later stage of the investigation. The murder was connected to one of the hunters whom regularly booked some hunts on the estate during the hunting season, who had been having an affair with an au pair, and subsequently she had fallen pregnant. He was terrified of his wife finding out about his steaming affair with a young woman whom they had hired to take care of their children. He murdered her and subsequently buried her body on the very spot where we were building our home. I gather the au pair was refusing an abortion. He was subsequently arrested and was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. You would think the story would end there, but not a chance. This is my mother's recollection of her part of the story after I was born, in her own words, of course. Well, as you can imagine, I was over the moon to be building a house on such an exquisite piece of pristine hunting estate, because it was such an idyllic, picturesque part of the world to live. Regretfully, after the builders found the body of the au pair, I was less than comfortable about resuming the building project, given that our home would be built over the location of once a dead body. As you can imagine, that very idea did not rest comfortably with me, and I did consider selling our land back to the hunting estate. My husband assured me it would all be fine, and it appeared in the beginning that he was right. That was until the advent of the birth of our first child. The moment Beryl was born, very inexplicable, peculiar things would start happening in our home. I had a baby monitor in my bedroom, so if Beryl was crying during the night, I would awaken and go attend to her. I would be awoken to the sound of Beryl chuckling, and I heard a woman's voice on the monitor talking to my little daughter. I would go running into the nursery, and I would notice that everything was suddenly very still, almost too still. But my baby was chuckling, and the butterfly mobile above her cot was moving around and around all on its own, and I did pick up a very light scent of Rose's perfume. I know that scent comes from Yves Saint Laurent. I don't know what it's called, but I know it. I also kept getting the very distinct impression that I was being watched by unseen, invisible eyes, and there was nothing there. For a while I thought I was going completely mad, so I decided to set up a tape recorder in the baby's nursery. And imagine my horror when I heard a woman's voice telling Beryl, "I'm your mummy. Mummy loves you. Say hello to Mummy." I could hear this young girl referring to herself as Beryl's mother, and that made me sick to my stomach and nauseated beyond words. My husband and I decided to move Beryl's cot next to our bed, and I was awoken to the sight of a spectral, ghostly young woman wearing a white nightgown, leaning over the cot, playing with my young baby, who was chuckling happily. I screamed out in horror, "Go away! Leave my baby alone!" And the woman looked at me and gave me a creepy smile, and then vanished before my very eyes. My husband was trying to calm me down. He had seen her too, but I was in a desperate panic because a ghost was interacting with my child. That night I went to sleep holding Beryl in my arms so tightly and refusing to put her back in her cot. The following day I had no option but to call my pastor, and he came to my home with a psychic medium to see if anything could be done to get rid of the ghostly apparition of the woman who was obsessed with my child. They did see this as a very serious situation. Prayers were naturally prayed, candles were lit, and sage was burnt all around my home. The medium told us that the girl's name was Astrid, which I knew is a Swedish name, and was in fact the name of the Swedish au pair, whose bones had been discovered under our property. The psychic said that Astrid believed that Beryl was in fact her baby, and was so convinced by this fact that she told me that she was having to inform Astrid that she was actually dead, and so was her fetus, but she had refused to believe it, or even accept it. So the next few days that followed, despite all the prayers that were prayed, it appeared that the ghost of Astrid became aggressive and started to throw all kinds of books all over the place, and even my china in my dresser was flung violently on the kitchen floor, and pieces of my cutlery were lying in pieces scattered everywhere. I phoned my friend in absolute tears, explaining to her everything that had transpired, and she suggested that I had a long conversation with the ghost. And so that's what I did. I mean, what did I have to lose? I remember lighting a candle and burning some sage, and then praying for Astrid's soul. Finally, I sat down and told Astrid how sorry I was that she was dead, how unfair it was that her life had been taken so scandalously by such a horrible man, and how sorry I was that she had lost her fetus, and how sorry I was that everything had transpired, and I hoped that in some way she would find peace. I don't know how to say this to you, but the heaviness that saturated our home for so long after Beryl had been born just suddenly dissipated, and everything became airy and light. And on Beryl's cot, a day or so later, I found a pretty pink rose, and I realised that was Astrid's way of reaching out to me and saying sorry. After that ordeal, we had no more problems in our home, which was miraculous, so we didn't even have to sell. I was so relieved. As you can imagine, I was too small to have a memory of Astrid the ghost, who was obsessed with me when I was born. I really was so grateful to grow up in such a beautiful hunting estate, as the land was so superbly managed, and we had all the benefits without the work that involved in running the whole estate. So my father's wager on a fleeting game of poker in Vegas truly blessed our lives in more ways than you can ever imagine. Growing up with my younger sister Gemma, we pretty much were free to be as adventurous as we liked. Although my parents advised us never to go into the wooded area during the hunting season, because that could potentially be very dangerous, with hunters using the vast estate during the hunting season for hunting spectacular species of deer with awesome racks. It wasn't sensible to go rambling around the woods on those occasions, as random accidents invariably do happen, and stray bullets have often affected people. I loved the red brick house my parents had built because it was very spacious and airy, with wide-arched white wooden framed windows throughout, a large double-sized white wooden front door, as well as a very large wrap-around white wooden deck. My bedroom was on the upper story, and one day I was glancing out of my large arch window when I saw this huge shadowy dark form darting into the woods with the dead body of a mule deer thrown over his shoulders like a large sack of potatoes. This giant creature looked like a monstrous-sized man covered in coal-black hair. Whatever it was, I was intrigued, curious, and exceedingly inquisitive. The creature was so titanic in its proportions that it had made the huge deer on its back look almost tiny. I immediately dashed downstairs, grabbed my dad's Remington rifle, a pair of binoculars, and I simply raced into the woods as fast as I could. I wanted to find out what this huge giant creature was that had the appearance of a human, but was way too colossal to be human. As I entered the woods, one thing got my attention, and that was a trail of blood on the forest floor from the mule deer, and this monstrous muddy footprint that measured at least 22 inches. I followed the trail of blood, and then I came to an oak tree where the dead deer had been placed and was dangling precariously on a branch that was 8 feet off the ground, and was so freshly killed it was still dripping blood from the branch onto the forest floor. I could hear the sound of very heavy feet walking through the undergrowth, and the very distinct rustle of leaves, so I immediately hid behind a large oak tree and literally crouched down behind, making myself as small and inconspicuous as I possibly could. Then I saw him. I couldn't believe what I was actually seeing. This creature was a giant among giants. He was colossal, and he had the longest arms that I've ever seen, and a very burly, muscular, powerful, strong body that was covered in dark black hair that was about 2 inches long and incredibly matted. The creature had to possess the most Goliath-like shoulders that I have ever yet to see, and it had a very distinct bullet-shaped head. It looked like it was quite human-like, but there were aspects of this creature that were remarkably ape-like in appearance, so I don't quite know how to explain what he looked, because it was an amalgamation of both species. As I was watching this creature, I was silently chastising myself for following this creature into the forest. I now realized I was staring at an apex predator, and I was behaving exactly like a mouse sitting on a cat's dinner plate, waiting to be eaten. I knew following this creature was possibly the singly most foolish thing that I could ever have done. Sometimes I was too impulsive and curious for my own good, and my father had always warned me against being too impetuous. Now I knew that if this creature got a whiff of me, I was surely dead. I felt certain about this, so I made every effort to remain as quiet as I possibly could. For some reason the silence in the wood had become airy and unnatural, as the pretty bird song I was so used to hearing was suddenly absent, and even my own breathing became airily loud. The next thing I knew that there was another one of these monstrous giants that came into view. But if it were at all possible, this giant was even more elephantine in size than the black creature, as he was covered in silvery grey hair, and his hair was marginally longer. It was like the creature was the same, but different, like you get a Labrador and a Golden Retriever in the dog breeds, if you know what I mean. It was like that. These creatures were clearly not friends, and I could feel the animosity and hatred between the two of them. It reminded me of 2 male lions who were opposing each other viciously for dominance, because these creatures began to wrestle each other violently and aggressively. At first I thought they were fighting over the deer carcass hanging over the tree, which seemed a bit odd to me. I then suddenly realised that they were scrimmaging over a female, because suddenly she came into view. I knew she was female because she had hairy breasts and a very gentle feminine demeanour. She was covered with dark hair that had a slight red-gold hue to it, which I only happened to observe when shafts of sunlight from the forest canopy danced across her hair. I watched the female squatting on the ground as she scrutinised the battle in progress between the 2 burly ape-like humanoids, who proceeded to fight, and they fought with all their might. It wasn't pretty to watch. The grey hairy humanoid was colossal in size, I kid you not, and he let out the most monstrous growl that was so blood-curdling it quite literally vibrated through my chest. And to make matters worse, the black humanoid ape also unleashed another almighty roar. So in response, and truly if your eyes were shut, you would believe you were in a den of lions. It was that frightening. The grey humanoid ape definitely had the upper hand, because he was superior in strength, might and weight, and he lashed out at the dark creature with a very weighty fist, and struck a huge blow across the creature's nose and jaw, causing it to bleed, and I think he may have lost a couple of teeth in the process, but I can't be sure. The grey humanoid then literally thumped the creature on the side of his head, so that he passed out and lay on the ground for a couple of minutes, seemingly lifeless. He then sat on top of the dark humanoid body, like you or I would sit on a chair, and punched him violently several times, lashing him so hard that a couple of the areas of flesh were violently lacerated and bleeding from the impact of the sheer force of his weighty fists, causing the tissue to literally explode on impact. Suddenly the dark-haired creature staggered very, very slowly to his feet. He hung his head very low, and his eyes were viewing the ground in an act of surrender and submission. He grabbed the deer carcass from the tree and flung it very slowly over his shoulders, and he scuttled away, looking like a defeated foe, and I heard him whimpering, so I guess he was in pain, but I suppose that's hardly surprising, given the state of his injuries. The way he ran away, he looked so much like someone who'd been humiliated, belittled and outsmarted. I did feel desperately sorry for him, and my heart went out to him. I couldn't imagine what he must be feeling. I'm almost certain they fight over female to win her affection. And she seemed quite happy with the outcome of the battle. Maybe she really did fancy the grey-haired creature. After the black creature had left, they both proceeded to make these happy whooping sounds, as if they were deliriously delighted by the outcome. And then later on they glided off together into the depths of the forest. Seeing this altercation had led me to conclude that the males sometimes have to fight for a female suitor. Maybe it's not always the case, but I imagine from time to time it does happen when they both like the same female. Years later, I was to realise that the creatures I encountered were indeed Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti or hairy man, whatever you want to call them. I know they like to remain incredibly elusive and to keep their distance from humans. They hate to be seen by us. My whole family has from time to time actually seen sightings of these Bigfoot, but never ever during the hunting season, which makes me think that they may wander away from this area at those times of the year. When we do see them, it happens so fast, at the blink of an eye, that you can almost second-guess yourself by actually saying, "Did I really see that?" So there you are. That's my story. Well, I just want to thank you so much, Beryl, for that incredible story. I can't imagine what it must have been like to build your house on a place where an au pair was actually killed by one of the hunters, and to actually have seen her ghost. That's terribly scary. Of course, you were so young at the time, but I can't imagine what it was like for your parents. But to win 4 acres of land on a hunting estate over a poker game in Vegas, it doesn't get better than that. And you did get to see the Bigfoot. So you have been pretty lucky, I think, in life. I think many of my viewers would agree, or my listeners, should I say. Well, what a lovely story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.